Hello, this is Christina Jang from ITDP, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. First and foremost, I hope you, your family, and friends are safe and healthy. Thank you for choosing to spend time with us today and for engaging the ITDP community during these times. Before we begin, there are just a few housekeeping items. For any media inquiries related to the webinar, please email me directly and you will receive my contact information after the webinar. And this is to assess speaker approval and also to review any written materials that may be published. As for accessing the webinar today, we will share the recording and PowerPoint with you on our website, and I'll also send it via email after the webinar. Lastly, to interact with me and our host today, I encourage you to use the Q&A function, which is at the top or the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. And I encourage you to submit them as we continue through today's presentation, as it will not interrupt any of our presenters. Again, thank you so much for joining our webinar today, titled Chinese Cities, Modal Shifts and Private Sector Responses. Today, our hosts are Richard Liu, Regional East Asia Director at ITDP, and also Shuai Ren, the Senior Manager at DiDi Global, and also past speaker at Mobilize. So Shuai, it's great to reconnect with you today, and thank you for joining. This session, we will take a deep dive look into Chinese cities and how the spread of the virus has profoundly impacted urban transport systems. Richard will discuss the modal shift and other significant changes thus far in cities that we work in, and Shuai will share insights on private sector responses and shifts in public transit since the onset of the pandemic. Now I hand it off to you, Richard, and you can begin to share your screen. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. And good morning to the folks on the other side of the world, and good evening to everyone in my neck of the woods. Today, I would like to use this opportunity to share some of the findings we have from the 2 rounds of online surveys ITDP China program conducted. First time in early March, second time earlier this month in May, on the travel pattern shifts in China during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. And the first 6 slides are results from the surveys, 2 rounds of surveys we conducted ourselves. And the next 6 slides is materials we gathered from other sources during the same period. And we have been cross-referencing with, and we would like to share that with this audience as well. So from those 2 surveys we conducted ourselves, we can see there is significant changes in terms of people's travel patterns. On the graphic on the left, on this slide, it shows before and after meaning the March 2020, the March survey. And we will see the first 3 bars, walking and cycling. There is significantly increased before, after the COVID-19 pandemic. And the next group is transit, public transit, including buses, company bus, and metro. We'll see there is a significant decrease. The metro ridership dropped from 26% to 14% in March. That is a very significant 50% drop, and then bounced back to 21% in early May. During the same period, bus ridership went from the pre-COVID level of 17% down to only 10% in March, and very slowly recovered back to 12% in early May. And also during the same period of time, we see there is an increase on the number of people driving cars from 36.8% 38.8% to a little over 40% in March. On the next slides, we focused on the transit group, on the transit riders who identify themselves as transit riders before COVID-19. And the graphic on the left shows the shifts within the transit rider group in March. We see only a little over 1/3, 34%. They remain in the transit rider group. And about 20% of them shift to using walking and cycling as their preferred mode of transport. And the more significant group of about 40% shift to motor vehicle, private cars, taxis, and TNCs. On the right-hand side, it shows the shifts within the transit user group in May. Here we see within 2 months, a pretty significant increase within the transit group from 34% to nearly 60%. This is over a 50% increase within the transit group. And there are 3.5%, the first group using walking as their main form of transport, and 8.6% cycling. And the group shifted to motor vehicles has shrinked down to a little over 22%. So those shows the changes within that 2 months period between March and May. On the next slides, we also asked questions to our online group on changes in terms of recreational trips taken over the weekend. The result shows majority of the users, 89% choose to either stay at home, that's 41%, and or going out less, that's 48%. Only 9% of the people we surveyed decided to take a recreational trip as before. That's the May survey. We also zoom in to see very closely between two groups, and we made this comparison: the car owning group and the car free group. And we did the before and after COVID-19 comparison. On the left-hand side, it shows the car owning group, and the significant change before and after is before the pandemic. In the car owning group, only about half of them drives. 51% use cars, and after COVID-19, and there are that number has increased from 51% to 63%. And for the car-free group, and they are more likely to use walking and cycling, and we see the decrease on use public transit from 26% down to 14%. And there is a significant increase for walking, biking, and using the share bikes within the car-free group. And on the next slides, we focus on the cycling. It seems like from all the surveys results and data we collected online, cycling has grown significantly throughout in China. We did a separate survey in the city of Guangzhou. The commuters in Guangzhou, within the commuters in Guangzhou, we have found out that many of them has shifted their travel mode from transit to cycling. In Beijing, 3 largest bike sharing systems, they all saw the increase in terms of their user by roughly 150%. That's really significant. In addition, data from those three largest bike sharing companies also show the average trip has increased from before the pandemic is somewhere around 1.5 kilometers to more than 3 kilometers, which is really uncommon before the pandemic, when the longer trips were typically carried out by cars and transit, and sometimes by e-bikes when it's available. So in addition to this, to concerns about taking public transit away from the crowd, and it's also very likely that the massive decrease in the car traffic during lockdowns in many Chinese cities has made the cycling to become more appealing and much safer. So those are some of the key findings from our own study and our own survey conducted in March and May this year. And this, for the rest of the presentation, we're going to show information we collected from other sources and focusing on three areas: cycling, taxis, and also metro ridership as well. So this is a very interesting study coming from China's largest navigation company, navigation app, on a map. In Chinese is 高德地图. It shows two significant days: January 23rd, when the Wuhan lockdown started, and also February 10th, the first day of a very slow process of returning to work. And on this chart, it shows the willingness to travel. So this is not the actual travel data. This is based on the user using a map function, as basically the search function, and to predict the general public's willingness to travel. And this covers the first quarter of 2020. And we can see very clearly there is a downward trajectory for traveling, for willingness to travel by public transit, and it's a slow upward trajectory for willingness to travel by bike. And on the next slide, it shows the actual data in the city of Shenzhen on the taxi ridership decrease. Again, this chart starts from February 10th, the first day of returning back to work, and it covers the following 4-week period, first, second, third, and fourth week after returning to work. On this chart, the top line, the blue color line, shows the number of taxis going out. That means being dispatched out. And the orange color line shows the actual ridership, the actual trips during the same period. So two significant part of the information, and a large amount of more than half of the taxis during those 4-week period of time are actually running on empty trips. And at the end of the survey, then the fourth week after returning to work, taxi ridership has only returned to about 35% of the normal level. So it's still a very long way to go for taxis to be back to normal. And on the next slides, we created this map. It shows this little bit dated by early March. Out of all 40 Chinese cities with metro services, 8 have completely suspended their. This was what happened during the COVID pandemic. 8 cities has completely suspended operations. 13 cities has closed stations and some lines, and a total of 30 cities has adjusted operation hours, and 2 cities with no changes on operation adjustment. So fortunately, with a well-integrated system of buses, metro, and bike sharing, and people can choose from other modes to as their preferred mode of transport as needed. So the good news is, so far from the information we have gathered, all those 40 Chinese cities have their metro services back to the normal operation. On this slide, it shows the significant ridership decrease in 7 Chinese cities. Those cities are Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chengdu, Nanjing, Xi'an, Suzhou, and Zhengzhou. So please note it doesn't include Beijing and Shenzhen, 2 of the largest city with the most significant riderships. So the charts shows the 2019 and the 2020 data. The 2019 is in the orange color, and 2020 is in the sort of the gray bluish color. And starting from the first day after the Chinese New Year holiday, so that would be February the 3rd, so on the top of the chart. And so this chart covers most part of the month of February. The last day, the 25th day after the Chinese New Year holiday, that's February 27th. So from the 3rd to the 27th of February. And we show collectively in those 7 cities is definitely a really significant drop in terms of metro ridership. The highest we see, the unit in this chart is 10,000. So it's combined 30 is around, it's a little over 35 million on the 19th day. And yeah, and from our analysis, it's only 22.3% during the first week after Chinese New Year holiday. So that is the reality we are facing at the moment. And this slide, on this slide, it shows again this city of Shenzhen, and it's the same 4-week period after returning to work. And the data shows from 2017 to 2020, and only 30% at the 4th week after returning to work, the metro has only recovered to that 30% level. So that is the end of this presentation. And in summary, we would like to share 2 lessons learned, 2 items with this audience. And first of all, it's very clear during the pandemic, even after the pandemic, walking and cycling has become the preferred way of travel. And it should give us opportunity to rethink our priorities for our transportation professionals. And I understand there are a lot of cities very quickly responded to that change, to that shift. New York City, Mexico City, and Bogota has closed a lot of roadways and temporarily turn into pedestrian sidewalks and cycling lanes. And for us, we need to ask the question how to keep the momentum going and to make those more temporary measures into permanent changes. And secondly, it is going to be a long way to help metro system to bring the ridership back. And we have seen different cities taking different measures. And a city of Beijing, where I am right now, and the Beijing Metro company has take on a measure to to increase the frequency by providing shorter headways. And there are 10 lines, metro lines here in Beijing, with headways around 2 minutes. That is a really significant change. And there are 4 lines currently running, and they have headways shorter than 2 minutes, 1 minute 45 seconds. So 4 of the 4 of the lines with more passengers. So many cities are taking on many different measures, and it's to fight against this stigma against public transit. And we hope from our survey and our studies, our sharing, you can find a little bit of inspiration, since many Chinese cities are gradually back to normal the life. And we hope we can provide some insights to our audience in many other parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Richard. We can go ahead and transition to our next presenter, Shuai. So you can go ahead and share your screen. In the meantime, I encourage folks to continue to enter questions in the Q&A function. We'll have about 15 to 20 minutes to answer those at the end. So please feel free to respond or further inquire about anything that Richard just presented on, and we look forward to Shuai's presentation next.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Christina, for the introduction, and thanks, Richard, for inviting me to share. Today, I will talk about DiDi's efforts during the pandemic period and how technology helped. So I will briefly introduce our actions in 2 parts, during the outbreak and towards post-pandemic period. During the outbreak, we have been focusing on providing emergency services to people in need and help reduce healthy risks of virus transmission, provide good in-vehicle environment for travel. And recently, when the market is reopening and we turn to work more on providing safer and convenient services for carless passengers, since more and more people started to commute daily, but still needs to remain careful about keeping safe and healthy. In late January, the city of Wuhan announced the decision of locking down the city, basically overnight, and we were overwhelmed when we realized the extent of the outbreak. But the company quickly gathered together a special task force, and we identified 3 goals to protect our people, including employees, users, and drivers, and to support the bigger community, to support the drivers as much as we can. Many cities shut down public transit services, as Richard mentioned, or they limited service frequency to reduce crowds transmission virus. At the same time, these cities started to organize special car fleets to provide basic mobility to residents and especially to frontline healthcare workers. DiDi joined Wuhan's emergency fleet at the earliest possible time. We quickly developed a special version of the car hailing product for these healthcare workers to use. And it was put online basically on January 25th in Wuhan. And right after that, a dedicated fleet of 200 drivers used the products to help the commute of more than 5,000 medical staff in the city. It took about 31 hours for our engineers to develop this new set of products and put it in use. First in Wuhan and a week later in Shanghai, Beijing, and other cities. Across China, about 160,000 drivers signed up to provide essential transportations to frontline medical workers using these products in about 15 cities. In addition to car services during the outbreak, we also provided free bike fleet for medical workers and community workers in some cities. Ever since our daily operations resumed in February, right after the Spring Festival holidays, we have been applying some key actions, including wearing masks, daily driver temperature checks, daily disinfection routines and supplies, and installing protective dividers. By end of March, we have launched about sanitation stations in about 200 cities in China. And that's the place actually we distribute supplies to drivers and provide car cleaning and disinfection services. On our app, passengers can also read the records of vehicle disinfection. So like what time and at which station. These pictures are in-vehicle plastic protective sheets to separate drivers and passenger back seats. This solution is recognized by medical professionals to be effective in minimizing the risk of airborne droplet transmission. We are not only installing this in our own vehicles, upon request from some public authorities, we're actually helping them to install the dividers. For example, in some cities, police cars and airport shuttle buses. One of our key principles is wearing masks. So we are using our own AI technology to verify whether drivers are wearing masks by asking them to take a selfie before they get on a trip. This is an effort to better care for the health of the driver partners and passengers who need to be on the road. In China, DiDi calls for both drivers and riders to wear a mask during trips. So our driver partners who fail to follow these requirements may not be permitted to provide rides to passengers through our platform. And we also open this recognition technology to other developers in China, so they can use it in other occasions where there's needs to detect the wearing of masks in real time. And we also work with bus operators. In Shenzhen, we work with the bus group to help them measure real-time occupancy rates and to alert the operator when it breaks certain threshold. So the operator then can increase service frequency or just add more buses to avoid coordinates on board and reduce the risks of virus transmission. Aside from working with like operators and car drivers, we also work closely with government to provide free cloud services to help them support research and relief projects. When the pandemic hits Latin America and Asia Pacific, we also replicate these measures to help drivers, passengers, and communities overseas. Because most of the measures we have been already applied in China, so we can quickly copy the standardized SOPs and launch services very quickly. So for example, in Latin America, we launched sanitation stations as well as motorized ones as shown in the picture in the left. And globally, over 2 million masks and sanitation supplies are being delivered to drivers and partners in Latin America, Australia, and Japan. And the dedicated fleet program, in global market, we call it DiDi Hero. It's a special fleet to service frontline medical and relief workers. And the number is about 50,000 drivers have signed up to the program and offered about 1.5 million free and discounted rides and meals for communities and healthcare workers across Latin America and Australia. For affected drivers, for example, confirmed cases and quarantined drivers, we launched a driver relief fund to provide subsidies and allowance upon request. Except for the measures I mentioned above, our ecosystem actually helped a lot. They give drivers lease extensions and financial relief. And some of our key leasing partners also receive short-term support from government and from our financial organization partners. As we are reopening recently, we are more focusing on like how to help reduce healthy and safety risks of using shared mobility services towards post-pandemic, and as well as using urban transit. This is actually government data on recovery of urban public transportation in China. We can see that by end of April, passenger volume has recovered about 50% compared to last year at the same time. However, we can see urban rail and taxis are a little bit higher, and buses is a little bit lower than that number. Still, many people inclined to drive every day and drive alone every day. So that congestion level in cities remain quite high since early April. So we are currently working very closely with government to get people feel more comfortable to use public transport. We find point-to-point transportation mode like commuter bus and DRT, meaning demand responsive transit, has turned out to be a practical way for returning to work after the break. We developed a web tour to assist bus operators in collecting passenger needs and planning routes accordingly. So those commuter buses are running on new lines, and those lines are only have 3 to 4 pickup and drop-off points with passengers mostly coming from neighborhood communities and companies at similar locations. And in addition, we also launched some DRT services in cities like Hangzhou, also partnering with local bus operator. So it provides passengers with reserve-based door-to-door transit services. So if passengers are in the service area, actually they can use our app to call a bus to pick them up. To address public health concerns, some companies actually, they encourage employees to share a ride to work. But there's seldom apps can provide such kind of function. So our Hitch services launched a new feature in the app that enables user to travel in this way. Any user under a registered DiDi enterprise account, meaning that the company is a customer of DiDi, they are able to access this new feature, and they can identify their co-workers and invite them to share the ride, regardless of whether they are the car owner or a passenger. And bikes, to encourage people to use bikes, since it helps to keep distance and promote greener mobility. We are launching like discount packages in many cities in China. And recently in Beijing, I think some of the audience may know that we are offering peak hour free services of bikes till end of this month. And many cities recently issued customer vouchers to residents, and we are part of the initiatives. During the first phase, DiDi will distribute travel packages, including for taxi services, for bike services, for about a total volume of more than 100 million RMB, hoping to help users to travel more safely and affordably. And last but not least, big data. We have released the Urban Traffic Activity Index. In early March, we released the recent ranking together with Peking University and the SciDi Research Institute. The higher the index is, the more active the urban traffic is. And basically this data shows that since early February, February the 10th, the vitality of transportation in the country has steadily getting increased. And this is the end of my presentation. And we've made a lot of efforts. Basically, what we're trying to do is to bring back the normalities as soon as possible and as much as we can, and hope that we can get through this tough period very soon. So thank you for your listening.
Great, thank you so much, Shuai. So I will go ahead and just kick off the Q&A, and thank you for those who have already started to enter questions for us here. I will begin with the first question entered from Miriam. Miriam, thank you so much for sharing. And I opened this up to both of you, Richard and Shuai, to give any insights. But have there been any different transportation options for persons with disabilities? And how has that changed during the pandemic and as Chinese cities have entered the post-pandemic era?
Christina, from the survey we conducted, unfortunately, we did not include any specialty groups, including people with disability. But generally, in China, before and after the pandemic, the main transportation options are taxis, metro, and buses are less in common. And in the city of Beijing, to our knowledge, there are about 300 specialty taxis, customized taxis, with lower floors, and easily you can roll in a wheelchair. And those are particularly designed for people with disabilities for them to ride. And I assume the major mode of transport is still private cars. Their family members will drive them around to help people with disability.
Great, thank you, Richard. And Shuai, if you have anything to add, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll just move on to the next questions here. So we seem to have a few questions, particularly about DiDi's protocols on putting plastic shields and protective materials inside cars and also in transit vehicles. Can you just provide a bit more information on if there's data on the effectiveness of it and how the company continues to evolve those methods as well?
On the protective sheets, unfortunately, we don't have much of data on that, but well, part of the reason is that in China, when we install the protective sheets, actually we are already passing the peak of the COVID-19. And still in many cities in China, we are, many of the cars are still having these protective sheets, but I have to say that it has to be maintained in a good condition so that it can pass the protective function, not to divide the driver seats and the back seats. Maybe I will go back to ask about our colleagues in global markets, because I think many of the cars in Mexico and in Brazil, they recently also get into this dividing the plastic sheets installation. And right after that, maybe I can come back to you.
Great, thank you, Shuai. So the next question here, I will point to Richard, and Richard, it's at the top of the Q&A box. Since the pandemic, can you point to any cities specifically who have accelerated or implemented their cycling infrastructure to accommodate this increase in cycling as a preferred transit mode, as you had mentioned in the presentation?
That's a very good question, and that is something we are still working on. We hope there will be more Chinese cities changed or improve their cycling infrastructure. Sadly, so far from the information we gathered, there hasn't been any significant improvement. However, we see the private sector are more united right now. There are, as I mentioned in my presentation, there are three major service providers, dockless bike share providers, and DiDi is one. And we see more of them sharing data and including the ridership increase and the average riding distance and so far and so forth. And I believe their goal is to showcase the importance of improving cycling infrastructure. And we hope there will be actions from the government side coming out pretty soon.
Great, thank you, Richard. So the next question here is from Ami. Thank you for submitting this topic. And I can point it to both Richard and Shuai. Has the government taken any measures to compensate public transit operators for financial loss during the COVID period?
I can take a first cut on this question, and Shuai can follow. And the public transit public transit operator is fully supported financially by the government, and so this is different from between China and many other part of the world, and there are private public transit operators. And most of the, well, I can say almost all of the transit operators here in China are public, or either publicly owned or companies supported mainly by public revenues. And so in that case, there is no additional compensation for the loss or damages during the COVID pandemic.
Thank you. And Shuai, if you have anything to add, please feel free to answer as well. Otherwise, I'll just go on to the next question here.
I think Richard has answered well. From our experience, some of the partners of bus operators, when they have the cash flow issues, they will go back and work with government arrangements to help sustain the public service.
Great, thank you, Shuai. The next question here is from Raphael, and thank you for submitting this topic on the scheduling of economic activities. And Shuai, I will point this to you. So during your presentation, you pointed to key protocols that DiDi put into place right when the pandemic hit, and then as you were preparing for the post-pandemic era. So as cities were reopening and the government was preparing for these different timelines, what were the specific measures and coordination that cities had with public transit to support people re-entering the economy and returning to work?
Well, different cities may take different measures. If I remember correctly, like as early as March, when in Beijing, many people has to go back to offices to work. There was a little bit worry about people flooded into metro systems and buses, and they become very crowded. There was some pilots of reserving usage of metros in several stations in north part of Beijing. So in that way, actually people are attracted to use online reserve tools to reserve slots to get into a metro station. And in this case, the government can know and predict the passenger volumes at each time slot. I see that is one of the innovative things to help people feel comfortable that they are okay to travel through public transit. What DiDi has also been working with, as I mentioned earlier, is that to helping bus operators to launch services that they can reserve tickets online, and we can help them to sell only a certain amount of seats on the bus, so that the occupancy rate is controlled, and we reduce the stops to get on and get off. People basically get direct service from home to company. And with all these efforts, I think we have already passed the stage of getting a little worried of going use public transit services. And as I shown in the presentation, that's by end of April, about 50% of the passenger volume has come back. And in recent weeks, and I've already feel that the crowdedness of metro has already come in.
Great, thank you, Shuai. The next question here is from Marcos, and it's specifically about cycling. So I will point that to you, Richard. What were some of the changes provided by public authorities to stimulate people to use the public bike share system specifically? And what were some of the key measures to ensure safe and healthy and clean sanitation of these systems?
Again, that's a very good question. And we have a very close partner here in China. City of Hangzhou runs the largest public bike system in the whole world. And a couple weeks ago, and we were invited, I was invited to do a webinar with representatives from Hangzhou Public Bike Company as well. That one was organized by C40's Walking and Cycling Group. And I recommend Marcus, you should, if you're interested, you can find out more information from that recorded webinar. You can find that on the C40's website. And if you can, just let me know, and I should be able to find you to find the information for you. So to answer your question, and using Hangzhou as an example, and the authority and has provided free access to public bike to the frontier medical professionals. And in order to provide, to improve the sanitation of the shared bikes for Hangzhou bike sharing system, and the company also initiated a reservation system. So employers, they of course they give priorities to hospitals and healthcare facilities, institutions as well. Employers can make group reservation on their by either on their website or on their app, or by calling the company directly, and the Hangzhou Public Bike Company will prioritize those requests and provide free services to the employers as well. So those are some of the measures the authority has taken on helping people to use the public bike share.
Great, thank you, Richard. The next question here is from Julia. And Julia, thank you for bringing up this point on ridership caps on buses and trains. So I will point this to you, Shuai. In the last question that you answered, you pointed to the online reservation system that has been useful in managing capacity on public transit. So can you also give examples on how systems are dealing with ridership caps and how they have been enforced? And then secondly, in terms of the operations side, is it the responsibility of drivers to manage this ridership on capping the number of passengers on the vehicle? And what is really the plan for passengers who are unable to board?
Is that sorry? Is that a question about the ceilings of occupancy rates on public transit on buses?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And she wrote buses and or trains, so you could speak to one or both. Mm-hmm.
Well, as far as I know, there is no strict numbers either for buses or for trains or metros in Chinese cities. However, there are controls to make sure that a general principle of people getting a space for at least 1 square meter, and there will be at least 1 meters in distance in between two people. I would say that some cities has trying to use a little bit like technologies to monitor. For example, I mentioned in Shenzhen, they have the crowdness, bodiness index, basically getting the number from the ticketing machines and the IC card information, and also some algorithm to reflect the real-time number. And some other cities, they may just like do it by fleet members, not only by the drivers themselves, but in some cities, buses, there will be 2 people on board who work for the bus operator. 1 people will be the driver, and the other people will be the one keeping an eye on these principles.
Great, thank you so much, Shuai. We have about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to combine a few questions here that we have from multiple attendees, and I'll point them both to you, Richard and Shuai. So Titus and Charlene and Angela, they're all asking what is going to be the new norm? And I think we would love to hear your thoughts and have you reiterate how long you think the full recovery process will be for public transit. It's hard to put an exact amount of time, but any of your insights on how long you will take would be great. And then secondly, what will the new norm look like in terms of taking transit and the increase, hopefully the increase in walking and cycling to be continued once cities are fully recovered?
Well, I can start, and we often ask ourselves the same question, what is the new norm? And I think we're all trying to find the answer. And from the data we have, just looking at transit on metro, from the data we have gathered, the ridership, it depends on the city. The ridership is slowly and steadily recovering. And some major cities like city of Guangzhou, we have already seen the on certain metro lines, the crowd is pretty much back to the pre-COVID-19 level. And that gave us hope. And again, many cities are taking different kinds of measures to bring the ridership up, like what I mentioned in Beijing. And the city is focusing on the supply side, increased frequency and shorter headways to avoid that kind of peak hour crowding and gives people that sense of security, safety and security on transit. So that is really important. And we hope we have some more positive news to report in the future in terms of the ridership increase on metros and buses. And I believe we're all in it together, and we should work collectively on bringing our life back. And that's really important to every one of us.
Maybe I'll just add 2 cents to Richard's point. Well, as we are seeing people are really getting back to normal, I still feel that, well, personal opinion, public transport and bikes are and will be the mainstream of travels in cities, especially bikes and share bikes. As we can see that more and more people are using bikes in this spring in China. They are more getting used to like bike even longer distance compared to the data we see last year. So it's not only for last mile connection now, it's more for an alternative mode of commuting. And that's a good sign for getting the whole public transport system towards more greener. So I'm more positive on the way that we're getting on greener and more sustainable side of the story.
Great, thank you so much, Shuai. So I will go ahead and wrap up our presentation for today. First and foremost, I would like to thank both of you, Richard and Shuai, for your great presentations today. Many cities in the world right now are looking towards Chinese cities to see what they have done and future-oriented planning. So it's really great to have an overview of the surveys and the different protocols that have been occurring in that region of the world as other places are preparing for their next steps. So thank you both again. And then secondly, of course, thank you to our attendees for joining our webinar from all different parts of the world in the morning and evening. We really appreciate your interactions today and for your attentiveness and for also entering these very important questions as we look to plan for the future. So as mentioned earlier, we will share both the recording and PowerPoints with you on the ITDP website, so you can look out for an email from me. But until then, thank you all again for joining, and we hope to see you all online again soon. Thank you.